I just wanted to take a moment and just build a little bit about the idea of misery loving company. And when people think about misery loving company, one of the first things they usually consider is that company being friends, associates, co-workers, or whatever, people who are outside of their household. The reality of misery loving company is those who are usually the closest to you are the company that you're taking your misery out on. Now, if you're a single parent, you have 2, 3, or 4, or how many children, you're not in a healthy relationship, you haven't been in a relationship for a while, you're getting older, you may have been in a series of dysfunctional relationships, you don't really have anything going on outside of your household except going to work and coming home, and you really don't have too much going on. That can be very depressing for some people. Very depressing. And because that is a depressive situation, people become miserable about that. And if they're a single parent, that company that they're taking their misery out on oftentimes becomes their children. Now, being a youth mentor for well over a decade now and engaging youth in just candid conversations about their households and what's going on in their daily life, I get the opportunity to hear things about what's going on that children necessarily wouldn't share with their parents. You know, I have teenage daughters myself, and I'm sure that they may share things with people that they may not share with me. And I've had the privilege to be on that side of things, so I get a unique perspective of what's going on in a child's world that parents necessarily don't have the opportunity to see or hear. And some of the things that I see and hear is that parents may come to me with advice and insight about, what's going on with their child, or even asking me about what do I think about why their child is acting out or doing this, that, and the third. And the reality of that is sometimes children are not acting out. They're behaving normal, relatively the same way as other children are. But because that parent is depressed, because they're living in a miserable state, they use transference and make it appear as though there's something wrong with their child because the child doesn't want to participate in that misery. They don't want to be cooped up in the house. They don't want to be around them to serve as a fixation device in their own construct of misery. And what I mean by that is because a parent is miserable and they're depressed, they really don't have nothing going on in their life. They tend to fixate on their own child as if now you're making my world. It's all about you. And those of you who are on Facebook or other social networks and you see people constantly being obsessive compulsive about their children and my babies, my children, a lot of times they're not really happy about that. It's not really a sense of joy behind all of those postings and comments and pictures. They're fixating on their children because they really don't have a life. And they're really upset, they're really miserable, they're really depressed about not having a life. So the only way that they can create some semblance of a life is to fixate on their children and to build dependency in their children so that they remain in that state, so that they can keep this facade up of so-called happiness and joy. So sometimes as children grow older, which all children do, and they're evolving and coming into their own as autonomous beings and adults, they don't want to play that game no more. They're tired of being the object of your illusional affection, and they begin to rebel out or assert their independence and autonomy. And now because they're doing that, the parent is turning around like, well, what's wrong with my child? Nothing's wrong with your child. They're growing just like you grew up. And they're finding their own way in life, and they're defining their own path and purpose independently of you as their parent. So in other words, the parent-child dynamic is changing. There's a paradigm shift where it's changing from child and parent to adult, which is a level of equity or equality. Some parents don't want to see that happen because now it blows their cover. Now their misery is not going to have company anymore. And some parents don't want to see that happen because now what are they going to do? You have some people who, because they don't have a significant other in their life, their daughter they try to say that, daddy's little girl, but they're treating their daughter as their little girlfriend, daddy's little girlfriend. Or you see mothers who have sons or a son, and instead of encouraging their son to grow up and to be a man, they're treating their son like their little boyfriend because they're miserable, because they're depressed, because they don't have a functional relationship. So when I see things like this, and I'm sure a lot of you see things like this as well, one thing that I strive to encourage parents to do is to first and foremost realize that we don't own our children. They're not our personal property. As parents, we're temporary guides to help develop our children into adults. So we help provide them with the skills to navigate this life so that they can become productive members of society and add their contribution to this world as autonomous beings, independent of a child-parent dynamic. And I understand if we have children who are gonna be physically dependent upon some type of caretakers because they may have a physical or mental disability. But when I see children who are college age and their parents are still treating them like grade school, we're not effectively helping them grow and develop when we do that. We're stifling them, and that becomes a child prison that we're building around our own children. So, number one, it's first and foremost important to realize that as parents, we don't own our children. They are not our personal property. We're here as temporary guides to help them grow into healthy, productive members of society as adults. Secondly, as parents, we need to find our own self. A lot of us say that we have knowledge of self, that we know who we are, but independent of being maternal or being a parent, a lot of us really don't have a life going on. We may not have a companion. We may not have any hobbies. We may not have any interests. We may not be doing anything in our life outside of going to work every day and coming home. We need to explore other aspects of who we are. We need to find a life for ourselves, independent of our children, because one day our children are going to be adults themselves and we're not going to be able to imprison them anymore. That prison sentence is going to end one day. So we have to prepare for a life when our children are not in the nest anymore, whether we like it or not. And we can prepare for that by finding a life for ourselves, So if you have young children, invest in time for yourself. Get a hobby. Go to school. Develop different type of interests and prepare for the day that our children are no longer going to be in our household and they're going to have their own life. So I will that this was inspiring. It was empowering. It was educating for those of you who are seeing the same things that I'm seeing, and that may be experiencing this and don't know how to deal with the reality that we're depressed. We're really just miserable because we haven't found a life for ourselves. And in order to get out of that sense of misery and that depression, we have to explore other aspects of who we actually are. Do things that are different. Find some interests. Develop some hobbies. Do things that are independent of just going to work every day and coming home. And like I said, encourage your children in their path of growth and development, because that dynamic of parent-child is going to switch one day to adult and adult. And when it does switch from a parent-child dynamic to adult, you want to have that relationship with this person who was your child at once. You don't want them to no longer want to have no relationship with you or not even talk to you because they felt like growing up in your household was a 18-year, 21-year prison sentence. So, peace.